We are live.
All right, guys. Hey, my name is Kyle Steele. I'm filling in for Mr. Sean Ihaz, hosting Fight IQ on RotoWire here. Joining me, I guess, for the first time. Joe, we have not done a podcast in a hot minute, so I appreciate you guys allowing me to fill in. Mr. Sung Soo himself. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. It is always fun to do a podcast with Kyle Steele. He has got the perfect voice for radio. Kyle, of course, he puts out great content with Loudmouth. So we're happy you were able to step in. You know, Sean pulled a quad. I mean, he's in Disney World. He is screaming so hard on Space Mountain that he pulled the quads. So he's actually unable to join us here, coming off a really solid DK card last week where I was able to clock a few ducats, as the kids say. I had was really hopeful that it would continue this card. And as I'm sure we'll soon discuss, we lost a few fights. So I'm cursed, man. I am in Atlantic City. I am looking forward to going to this card, to meeting up with Houdini, Sean, and Sergeant Scorpion. And, it's going to be fun group of guys here. And on the trip down, I find out we lose 2 fights and Kevin Lee doesn't make weight. So I am cursed when it comes to these events.
Yeah. And I can say I have never heard the term, what was it again? Clock and the ducats. What was it?
Clock and ducats, man.
Clock and ducats. All right. I've never heard it before. I don't know if I want to hear it again, if we're being honest. So if we can just keep that on the Fight IQ pod, that would be great. If we could let's not let that spread. Let's just keep it here.
Come on,
let's not let that spread to we're gonna get hashtag Cluck and Ducats or Clock and Ducats.
You're not a rap fan, obviously.
Hashtag Cluck and Ducats is gonna be up on all over Twitter. I think I've heard a couple times that I have a good voice for this, which is interesting because I was in speech therapy all the way into high school. I had a really bad speech impediment, R's, S's, Z's, C's. So I wonder if being so conscious of the way that I talk because of speech therapy has made me better for the radio. I don't know.
Dude.
It must be working. Also joining, and I guess, again, it's every single week, it is the real Christopher Olsen.
There you go.
Christopher or Chris? I believe it's Christopher.
Chris is just fine. Chris is just fine.
I believe the Twitter handle is Christopher, though, correct?
No, the Twitter handle is also Chris. Real Chris Olsen. Yes.
Okay, real Chris Olsen. All right, fantastic. So the card that we are discussing this week is UFC Atlantic City. I, of course, do not have it pulled up in front of me. I thought I did, but I did not. But it's UFC Atlantic City, headlined by Edson Barbosa and Kevin Lee, a fight that almost did not happen.
Jesus.
Maybe not almost did not happen, but a little too close for comfort. Kevin Lee missing weight by, I think, 2 solid pounds. He also had issues the last weight cut fighting Tony Ferguson. So it seems to be a kind of a systemic issue, and we saw what happened to him in that fight. So I guess my question as we break down this fight, Sung Soo, we'll go ahead and start with you since I know you. First of all, is this a systemic issue, and do you think this is going to affect Kevin Lee in this fight? And did it affect Kevin Lee in the Tony Ferguson fight? Sung Soo, take it away.
I think in the Tony Ferguson fight, at least he could blame it partially on his staph infection. He went into that fight with a staph infection, which is no fun. But my biggest issue with Kevin Lee is ego. I mean, he said in a recent interview with Ariel Helwani how he does not need a nutritionist to cut weight. He's okay cutting weight on his own. And, he misses by 2 pounds. And even worse than that is what I had heard, how he just left with his hands in his face. They actually, used the towel to weigh him in, and he looked all dejected. And now not only does he have to give 20% of his purse up, but it's important to note, and we'll talk about the fight when we get to it in terms of breakdown. Not only does he have to give 20% of his purse up, but anybody that misses weight cannot compete for any of the bonuses. So that potential $50,000 bonus for performance or fight of the night, or that is a big problem now. So maybe that's why he looked dejected. He's losing 20% and he can't get a bonus. Anything to add, Chris?
I would just say, as far as the weight miss, he said all over Twitter, he's been all over Twitter saying this is the first miss in his career. And, I just have to wonder if I don't know if the staph infection would be affecting him directly from the Tony Ferguson fight, but I mean that's a lot of wear and tear on his body now, and he had the staph infection. He fought with it. He now he misses weight, so it is worth wondering what kind of shape he's going to be in, and what kind of shape his body's going to be in. I don't know if you want to put how much of your analysis you want to put on that is up to you, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, when we get to the fight, we'll definitely talk about, our picks and how we think this affects. I do have a take on it, which I'll save for when we actually talk about the fight. But yeah, I think there is some room for discussion as to what this means.
Fantastic. Well, let's go and start from the bottom and work our way to the top. We have Tony Martin taking on Nakamura. Nakamura has been around for a hot minute. I don't know what number UFC fight this is, but he was in the UFC. I believe he got cut, came back, and he's kind of an up and down fighter. Fighting Tony Martin coming off of a loss. However, I think it is worth noting that loss was to Mr. OAM, who is quite impressive, and Tony Martin stifled him for the most part. So Tony's kind of an interesting prospect for me. I've been following his career since the beginning, but I'm going to leave the true and tested analysis to the actual analysis guys. So Chris, we'll start with you here. Thoughts on this fight, Tony Martin versus Nakamura? Kicking off on fight, I believe now the only fight that will be on Fight Pass. There's one fight on Fight Pass, and it's this one. Yeah,
well, I hope you guys have your Fight Pass ready. You're really paying real good money for that. But I'm with you. I like Tony Martin. I think he's a good fighter. He kind of reminds me of James Vick. I like those tall, technical boxers who have slick jiu-jitsu, and Tony Martin definitely falls into that category. I like his use of the jab, the overhand. I like his willingness to go for submissions. Actually, in that OAM fight, the only takedown OAM got in space, Martin converted it to a Darce, ended up in top position, ended up taking the back, though it wasn't enough to win the fight. So I do like Tony Martin. My concern here is that OAM was almost able to take him down at will on the fence, and that's where Nakamura likes to get a lot of his takedowns too. And Nakamura is very good at taking the back. He can ride out rounds there. I would say that he's a little too willing to be pressured, and I think that can work to Martin's favor. He's a little too willing to wait and counter, throw those heavy body kicks. I think it really depends on how soon he gets his wrestling going, because we saw in his Alex Morono fight, he didn't even try for a takedown till the third round. So if he gets his wrestling going, I think it could potentially be an issue. But if not, I kind of just like Tony Martin to, control the pace and take a decision.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I'm going to give my pick on this one, I have Tony Martin by decision. More importantly, Tony Martin kind of by smother. I think you used the right word there. I think it's kind of what we're going to look at here, in my humble opinion. Sung Soo, thoughts?
Okay, so there's a couple of angles to this fight. First of all, let's give the DraftKings salaries, because that's what we really all care about here. I believe Tony Martin is 8.9K and Nakamura is 7.3. Is that correct? I don't know if you have it open, Chris, but I believe it's
get it for you in 1 second. Just keep going.
Yeah. So this is Tony Martin's debut at welterweight. So he always had bad weight cuts. He was a big 155er. He is moving up to welterweight. Tony Martin has bounced around. That loss to Olivier Mercier was a split decision loss. Which again, Aubin Mercier's stock has risen, so that loss doesn't look as bad as it might have at the time. Prior to that, he sort of outboxed Johnny Case. Johnny Case is no longer in. Hollywood Case is no longer in the UFC. So we got a guy making his debut at welterweight. He's bounced around. I took different camps. I believe he's finally settled on ATT, which is obviously a top camp down in Florida. Again, Nakamura is tough. In terms of value for DraftKings, I probably am going to have more exposure to Nakamura simply because of the price value and the fact that I don't know that Tony is going to be able to finish him. I could certainly see this going to decision. Tony does have quite a few submissions on it as part of his pedigree. But in terms of DraftKings value, I mean, there are guys, well, again, now we're down 2 fights, but there are guys that I think I like more in that price range. So it's 8,800 and 7,400. That's the split. There are guys that I like more in that range, I think. So I'll probably have some exposure to Martin, probably a little more exposure to Nakamura. I don't necessarily see this as a high-scoring fight, though.
Yeah, in Tony Martin's fights tend to not be very high scoring, so it just kind of follow the trend. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that's true, but I think this could be something of a leverage play for Martin if you did want to take a couple shots in GPP. Just because I think I don't know. I just have this feeling that Nakamura is going to give him exactly the kind of fight he wants by just letting him pressure and just looking for counters. And if that happens, I think Martin could potentially turn it on and maybe get a higher score than we're used to seeing from him.
Absolutely. Right. We'll move on up. We have Corey Anderson. This is kicking off our FS1 prelim starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. We have Corey Anderson taking on Patrick Cummins. I kind of want to talk about Patrick Cummins' mustache. Kind of want to talk about that his nickname is Durkin. There's a couple things I want to talk about that have nothing to do with the fight. But nevertheless, listen, we have 2 punching bags going at it, which is always exciting to watch. I imagine one of these guys can crumple. So I would say this is my kind of dark horse fight. I'm not hearing a lot of people talking about it, and I think that this could be a pretty awesome fight. It's kind of the mid-tier guys going at it here, but like it's hard because that division is so weak that it's hard to know kind of what the tier system is. But I would consider these 2 kind of mid-tier guys. Corey Anderson is coming off of a loss to OSP, and that loss is a capital L. He got thunderstruck into oblivion by OSP. Was it a kick?
Did he
kick him in the face? It was a kick, right?
Yeah.
But before that, he was, I think, winning the fight and winning it pretty soundly, which isn't the easiest thing to do in the world against a guy like OSP. So there's definitely stuff there. For me, Patrick Cummins has, continued his descent a little quicker than Corey Anderson. I got Corey Anderson winning this fight, although, I'm certainly not betting I'm not betting on that. We'll just say that. The DraftKings prices, we have Corey Anderson at 8,300 and Pat Cummins at 79. So relatively equally priced here. I imagine that one of these guys is going to be on quite a few teams, just given the price point. Sung Soo, we'll go ahead and start with you, sir.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of interesting angles here. I mean, what do you take away that Corey Anderson was beating OSP? And all he had to do was stay away from him in the 3rd round, but he didn't and got knocked unconscious. What do you take away from that fight? I mean, his chin has come into question. He's a good wrestler, but he's also going against another good wrestler who is actually, has won his last fight. So, I mean, this is really interesting. You've got 2 really good wrestlers. Is Anderson the better striker? Probably. He might be a little stronger. There's a lot of love for Anderson on Twitter. I'm hearing a lot of people betting him. I think I threw him in a parlay. I'm pretty nervous because, again, although both fighters have chin issues, it seems like Anderson has the ability to take less damage than Cummins. So this is kind of an interesting fight. I mean, if you're looking at an inside the distance victory in this fight, you should probably target it and maybe have a little bit of each. Or, I know a lot of people that are just drawing a line in the sand and saying how they love Anderson. I think that's very risky. I think Anderson is more technical. He might have better stand-up. But, again, if Cummins catches him right, we've seen how he folds. So there's a lot of risk here. I would not kill you if you wanted to just draw a line in the sand and pick one of these guys. I know some people that are actually on Cummins, but my lean is towards Anderson. If you ask me to pick a winner of this fight, it's a very nervous pick for Anderson. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually thought I'm surprised that Twitter is is a buzz for Anderson because I thought I was the only Corey Anderson fan left. I actually like the way he fights. I like the way he fought in that OSP fight. I think he was controlling distance really well, moving in and out with the strikes, and backing him up to the fence. The thing about OSP, of course, is he's enormous. He's a guy who can just stop takedowns just based on the fact that he's crazy athletic and he's going to be bigger than you. I don't think Patrick Cummins, he's going to have the same issue with Patrick Cummins. I think he's going to be considerably stronger, although Cummins is a strong guy in his own right. But I also think that the striking, like I said, the in and out movement. I think it's going to be more difficult for Cummins to get inside on Anderson's leg based on the movement, and I think Anderson, I don't want to say have his way in this fight, but I do think that one thing I have to say about chin issues. I'm not here to tell you he's got the best chin in the world, but I dare you to name me a fighter who would have withstood that head kick. So.
No, but I mean, even if you look at Jimmy Manawa knocking him out.
No, I know.
And the one other point I want to make real quickly is that in terms of wrestling pedigree, and someone can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Cummings has got a higher level collegiate wrestling pedigree. I believe he was D1 and Anderson was D2, for whatever that's worth. I think his pedigree is slightly higher.
I would say, though, personally, MMA wrestling, I would definitely go Anderson. I think he's a more kind of well-rounded wrestler. Because of course there's the difference between collegiate and kind of MMA, but nevertheless, I think you're absolutely correct. But yeah, I think for me, the reason why we're all kind of giving Anderson the nod here has to do with completion of fighter. That's kind of my guess. We're all kind of queuing in on that.
Yeah, I mean, what a lot of people are not mentioning, or although some of them are on the pods, is that Cummings actually beat Jan Blachowicz, and we know how good Juan is. But Jan Blachowicz has been lately. I mean, he beat Jimmy Manawa. Look, MMA math doesn't work. We all know that. Yeah. So Jan beats Jimmy Manawa. Jimmy Manawa knocks Corey Anderson out cold. So lo and behold, that means Cummings should win this fight, right? Well, not always, but my point is be careful. Don't ignore them. No. If you're playing mass entry GPPs, you should have some of Cummings. I would not draw a line in the sand in mass entry. If you're playing single entry, I think it's risky, but it's okay if you're going to pick one or the other. But in mass entry, you should be playing both.
I have an interesting little stat on our first fight, actually. It's not stat, but little tidbit. I believe Nakamura's UFC debut was against Brock Larson.
Wow.
Am I correct in that?
I think so.
His debut is against Brock Larson. Do you know who Tony Martin's coach is?
Yep.
Brock Larson.
So
it's kind of interesting.
That's interesting. I didn't even make that connection. See, from Kyle Steele already adding value. That's Sean already adding value that the sniper would not have added. What's going on here? So that's great. I did not know that. Awesome.
It's the worst competition in the world, me versus Sean.
Yeah, when we go through these fights, let's even talk about the fights that canceled, so we can kind of chime in really quickly on. So just follow the regular itinerary, and we can talk really quickly about the fight that's canceled and how that's going to affect how we strategize. Okay,
sure. So let's go ahead and talk about one fight that was canceled that was going to be on the UFC prelims here. We had Leslie Smith taking on Aspen Ladd. My lean before the fight was Leslie Smith. I just figured she would have a size advantage, and her opponent's the one that misses weight. So interesting. And Leslie Smith refused the fight. And I have now read from reputable sources that she has now been paid her win bonus as well, so that it counts as a fight, and the UFC is not going to renew her contract. So interesting. That is correct. They paid her 60-something thousand to leave the UFC. Look, she's been a radical, within the UFC, and I'm not going to comment on the politics, but the UFC, I don't think they had any intention of re-signing her anyway, and I'm really disappointed, though, in Leslie Smith for not taking this fight. I mean, they could have had a catch weight fight. She was going to get 20% of Aspen Ladd's purse. I am disappointed because I liked Leslie Smith in cash.
I mean, she's been DraftKings Gold. She scored a lot of points. She's a high volume striker. I don't want to talk too much about a fight that's not going to happen, but I have a lot of lineups that I have to change. So we'll kind of leave it at there. I had Leslie Smith in a fair amount of lineups. I had some Aspen Ladd because I saw Aspen Ladd as a GPP play, and and I saw Leslie Smith as more of a cash play. So I had some of both, but I had a lot more Leslie Smith because that was one of my hot takes for cash.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Chris, you have anything to add?
Well, I would just say I agree with you. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about this fight. I was wondering myself if she would be able to stop the takedowns, and I also wondered how the fight would go because they both love to pressure. So who pressures first? But I would say that I think we have some. I think a lot of people are going to be like you, Joe. I think they're going to have had a lot of Leslie Smith just because of what a point scoring magnet she's been lately. But I think we have some fighters coming up that are in a similar price range that could definitely be some strong cash plays.
All righty. So that was the fight that was canceled in between the stuff we'd already broken down. We have a fight after this one that's been canceled. So let's do this one first. We have Sayer Bahadurzada. Did I get that correct?
Really good.
As correct as I'm going to get.
Yeah. Versus Luan Chagas. I think I got that right too. There is a fight on here that I will not get correct, so just be looking out for it. But I got that one, I think. All right, this is an interesting fight. I personally like Bahadurzada. I like the cut of his jib, as the kids say. I'm going to go with him here. I think he has the pedigree to do it. But again, this is one of those fights. I kind of put this with Anderson Cummins for me personally as being something that I don't feel too terribly confident on drawing a hard line on. And it looks like DraftKings is the same. Bahadurzada is at 8-2 while Luan Chagas is at 8. And even their points are similar, 74.3 for both. So interesting. This is it seems a very evenly matched fight. So Chris, we'll start with you. Thoughts?
Yeah, I actually I mean, obviously there's a chance that Bahadurzada can get a knockout here, but I actually pretty firmly like Luan Chagas here. I think he showed us a lot in that Jim Wallhead fight. He was switching stances mid-combination. He was coming in on angles. He was throwing in combination. He was keeping himself relatively safe. Now, I know you're gonna tell me that's Jim Wallhead, but a good-looking fight is a good-looking fight, and I think he's a really toolsy fighter. I think he can do a lot of things. I think he's strong. I think he's athletic, and Bahadurzada is what he is. He's a guy who's gonna move forward and throw heat, and I think Chagas is gonna keep good distance. I think he's gonna make Bahadurzada miss a lot. And I think Chagas could end up styling a little bit here, maybe even getting, a late TKO.
Interesting.
Fantastic.
Okay, so the way I see this is, one, it's a good fight to target for GPPs. Second, one of the issues I have with Chagas is his gas tank, right? He's been prone to gas. The other, I wasn't thrilled with the fact that he was submitted by Eric Silva. Which was not a good look for him. I'm a big Silva. He's been money for me, right? Interestingly enough, of all the fighters who have gone through the UFC Performance Institute and have gone through the battery of tests, the fighter with the fastest hands, Silva.
That's right.
He's got a lot of speed. I think if Chagas keeps this standing, he is playing into Silva's strength. I think that he needs to go for takedowns. That is somewhat of his kryptonite in terms of, I think his 2 losses, and again, he's very inactive, which is another issue that I have with Silva. He doesn't fight a lot. He's had 2 fights canceled before this one. One, I think he was hurt. Another, the other person had an illness. The other fighter had an illness. But I think Chagas' path to victory here is taking it down and trying for a sub before he actually runs out of gas. I'm going to have exposure to both sides of this fight in mass entry GPPs. For a pick, I'm going with Sayer, just because, again, I think he could catch Chagas standing if Chagas chooses to keep it standing, and I think he may have a better gas tank than Chagas.
The other fight that was canceled on this card is Magomed Bibliatov taking on Sasaki. Bibliatov was deemed basically unfit to continue to cut and then unfit to compete. I think I share the same sentiment as many UFC fans that we truly viewed Bibliatov as being the next coming here. This was going to be the guy. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I feel like a lot of us really viewed him that way. And, he had kind of he won the fight. He won it soundly, but I think a rather unimpressive debut. And then, of course, got knocked out almost immediately by John Moraga. And now he has an issue making the weight. So interesting how quickly, this prospect is kind of.
Well, actually, Kyle, I don't think it was a weight issue. I think it was a back issue.
Really?
Yes, back.
Yeah, it was a back, like he had a back injury or something. It wasn't really related to weight. I mean, my biggest issue with this fight is that, I liked him to win. Sasaki is tough. I was going to have a small taste of Sasaki because he's so long that if he wraps you up, he could potentially sub you. But my biggest issue with this fight is he was the highest priced fighter on the card, and a lot of people are going to go, a lot of people who have to now find another fighter are going to go off on who I like as my best play of the card. So that's my biggest issue with this fight falling out. Not that I was in love with it, targeting it for cash or GPPs, but more that now the guy that I really like is going to get a lot higher ownership because of this.
So fight that is still here. We have Ricky Simon taking on. Now here's the name, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if I want to try it. Mirab Divashvili.
Close enough.
That'll be fine.
I'm gonna call him MD. He's not a doctor, but
no, I like that MD.
But his name's crazy. So we're going with MD versus Ricky Simon. Ricky Simon making his UFC debut in technicality. This is his second fight because he fought under the Looking for a Fight banner. I'm big on him. I know his fight on Looking for a Fight, he won by, I believe, split decision. I think he won it, but I mean, nevertheless, it was by decision. A lot of the guys who are winning by decision aren't necessarily going to make it into the UFC from that show. But to me, there's a reason why he's here. I truly believe in this guy. This is one of my kind of prospects to watch. So we shall see. This is a big test for him coming in, but definitely not one that I don't think he can conquer. So Sung Soo, thoughts on this fight?
So it was interesting that MD, first of all, he actually had 10 takedowns in his last fight and he lost. So that is DraftKings gold. When you get 10 takedowns, even if you lose the fight, you're going to score reasonably well. He's a very wild striker. Simon might be a bit more technical. I don't know whether either fighter is going to have the same level of success because Simon's also features a pretty decent takedown. The other thing that worries me a little is, and we'll talk about this when we get to, the fight, but I believe that MD is a Serra-Longo fighter. That camp has kind of been in a rut lately. And I think fighters tend to peak very quickly in that camp and stop improving. My lean here is towards Simon. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of, I saw some tape on him, some people who I respect like him. For that reason, I am leaning Simon. I would still say because of the takedown possibility and the fact that he got 10 takedowns in his last fight, that you should probably look at having a little bit of MD and mass entries. This might even be a good cash fight to target. I certainly wouldn't stack it, but it's a good cash fight to target. I don't know that either one is going to get a finish out of this fight. I think it's going to be a points fight, decision, but whoever gets the takedowns, is going to score. So I don't know that I would like this as much in GPPs because I don't really see a finish coming. But what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I actually agree with you completely. I would go a little bit further in saying that I think not just the striking, but I think Simon's individual game is better put together than MD's is. I think that you watch Dashvili, and he has a bunch of spinning attempts that he tried. He actually has a spinning back fist knockout, which I believe is his only finish. But his striking is he's the ultimate means to an end striker. He just wants to get it to the floor, and I think that Simone is just going to have way more weapons. I like his chain wrestling. I think it's really impressive. He can counter effectively. He's not the best striker either. He's a little wooden himself. He can counter effectively, but I just think that there's more of a coherent game here with Simon. And Dashvili can't be a terrible play for all the takedowns as you mentioned, but I'm going to have more Simon myself, although I'm also going to have both sides of this in GPPs.
Next fight up, we have Ryan LaFleur taking on Alex Garcia. I have definitely been I've been on the Ryan LaFleur bandwagon before, and I've also been on the Alex Garcia hate wagon. So interesting that these two people are now clashing. I'm going to go, just again, if I'm just going straight pick 'em, I'm going to go Ryan LaFleur, but I will leave the analysis up to Sung Soo. So
I'm actually going to take Alex Garcia for the upset here.
Sure.
At 7.6K on DraftKings. Ryan LaFleur, again, one of the things that the DFS sniper, one good point that he made last week was how people get changed when they fight Cowboy Oliveira. And Cowboy Oliveira just schooled Ryan LaFleur last time out. I mean, Ryan LaFleur, has some great tools, but he's a guy who may have peaked and is now on sort of the decline. Garcia actually, quickly submitted the King of Kung Fu the last time they fought. The King of Kung Fu came back and had a really impressive knockout last week. Alex Garcia is a TriStar fighter. I'm sometimes reticent to back TriStar fighters because they have this point fighting style approach. Also, Garcia has had some issues with his gas tank. He's a very heavily muscled fighter, and sometimes that carrying around that much muscle wears you out. He's had some knee issues. Anyway, at the price value, the fact that the line's tightening up on this fight, I am going to go for Garcia. I will have him fairly represented in mass entry GPPs. I don't necessarily see LaFleur being able to finish him, so I think Alex Garcia has a fairly safe floor and a pretty decent ceiling. LaFleur is 8.6K, 7.6K, I believe, for Alex Garcia. Again, I am going to pick Alex Garcia.
Chris?
Yeah, I tend to agree, although I don't completely trust Alex Garcia. I liked his fight against Salikov. I think that was the most focused Alex Garcia we ever saw, with a game plan that was just okay, I'm gonna go for takedowns. I'm gonna get the back, and that's gonna be it. I think that a lot of times he just worries about standing in space and throwing his big overhand right and hoping it ends the fight, which has cost him fights in the past.
Yeah, he's low output.
Very low output, yeah. But I do like him for the price in GPPs for sure. I wouldn't hate LaFleur as sort of a leverage play for the 86 in GPPs, just because, look, one thing that we know about Alex Garcia is he'll get tired if you get him tired. And we know Ryan LaFleur is a strong guy. He's a good wrestler. So if he can grapple with Alex Garcia, tire him out, I think he can take a win here. His last few performances, even his wins, haven't been that high scoring, but he does have a few high scoring wins in his past. If he can string together some takedowns and maybe even get a late finish, I think that can work. So I think he's not someone to look past in GPPs, though I do prefer Alex Garcia in both formats.
So that ends our prelims. We have now moved on to FS1's main card, starting at 10 p.m. First fight, we have Jim Miller taking on Dan Hooker. DraftKings wise, Jim Miller comes in at 7,000 and Dan Hooker comes in at 9,200. As a DraftKings player, that price point seems insane to me. Although I get it. I get the idea that Jim Miller is a bit past a bit past the prime, to say the least. So I understand the sentiment as to why people are so high on Dan Hooker, but that just seems like a crazy separation to me. Chris, we'll lead off with you.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that too heavily. I mean, what I've seen from Dan Hooker in his last couple of fights, I've liked. I don't know if he's going to be worth that money, but I like. He's very good at using his jab. He's good at using his jab going backward, which I like, which I think is interesting. He's a decent grappler himself. We saw him finish Mark Diakiese with a choke. Good leg kicks, but for the price, it's kind of hard to count Miller out in GPPs. We saw him really getting tagged up by Poirier, but finding those low ankle kicks and really hurting him in that third round. He's always going to be down for the scrap, and he can find knockouts, and he's a black belt himself in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as we know. He's a grappler himself. He can get takedowns and maybe get a stop. So I wouldn't mind throwing a little dart at Dan Hooker, I guess, but that price does seem really kind of almost not worth it. I'm tempted to say dog or pass for this fight just based on the price, but one Dan Hooker in a GPP flyer, sure, why not?
Yeah, so there are angles galore on this fight. I mean, one, Jim Miller, I believe, is only 34, but he is much older than that in fight years. Jim Miller is a New Jersey local. So this is a home fight for him. I'm sure he will have some people in attendance rooting for him. Jim Miller has made over $1 million fighting in the UFC. Jim Miller has never beaten an opponent 6 feet tall or higher. Props to Best Fight Picks for throwing that stat out.
Nice.
I believe Dan Hooker is 6 feet or higher. The problem and the other issue I have, and everything you guys said in terms of the price value and there's all those angles I mentioned, this being a local fight. My big issue with Jim Miller is, and apparently there was talk that during his last fight with Trinaldo that he essentially told his corner between rounds that he didn't have it. And you never like to hear a fighter say that. I just don't have it anymore. So I don't know if this is, drop my gloves in the octagon last fight for Miller. I do think he would have some potential advantages over Hooker if he could get him down and get it on the ground. He does have a better ground game than Hooker. I hope he does not try to stand with Hooker, because I think Hooker will beat him on the feet. And the other angle is I think Hooker is going to get some ownership from, Bibu, being not fighting. I think he's going to pick up some of that ownership. So there's a lot of angles. I could certainly see using Miller at 7,000 for all those reasons. But just be very, very careful, because do you want a fighter that in his last fight essentially told his corner he didn't think he had it? So those are all the angles that you have to consider when you look at that fight. I think Miller will be very popular. You can afford to have top end guys if you plug in his salary, but be very, very cautious with Miller.
Chris, we already got your thoughts on this fight. Anything you want to add?
Yes. I'm in the Dan Hooker probably wins camp, but too expensive.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we have Brett Johns taking on Aljamain Sterling. I think really the only question for me here is how good is Sterling's wrestling? You mentioned Sarah Longo earlier. This is a product of that gym as well. Or he is, not this is. He is a product of that gym as well. How good's wrestling here? Or can Brett Johns give us back-to-back calf slicers? Isn't that how he beat Joe Soto? Am I correct in that? It was a calf slicer?
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Very slick, yes.
How in the world does that even happen? I do a series for my podcast, right? It's called MMA Yesterday, and I started at UFC 1, and we watch it, and then we do interviews with old fighters and stuff. And we're up to like UFC 15 now. And it's just interesting. Like calf slicer is something you would have seen at like UFC 10. Like it's not something you're supposed to see now. You know, I don't know how you get caught in something like that. But anyway, besides the point, Brett Johns and Aljamain Sterling, 8-1, baby. This is our draw on the card here. We have 8-1, 8-1. So again, I think a lot of people are going to be drawing hard lines on this fight. So let's see if we can help them out. Sung Soo, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I got to give credit where credit is due. I was thinking about this, but since I didn't say it first, I have to throw out some props to both Best Fight Picks and Newsom. Where they referenced, Newsom particularly referenced Aljamain Sterling as a fighter that hasn't really improved all that much. And that was a point I was going to make. I haven't seen him improve all that much. He got viciously knocked out in his last fight. I mean, I don't know if he's maybe coming back too soon from that. It was a very vicious knockout by Moraes. We saw him get dominated on the ground by Brian Caraway. I was on Sterling on that fight. He was a big favorite. Caraway dominated him on the ground. And then this goes kind of to the whole Sierra Longo. And that's a point that, the boys at Best Fight Picks made, is that, this camp is, I don't know if fighters peak. I mean, look what happened to Weidman. These guys, I don't know if there's a systemic issue with the camp, but I do notice that fighters seem to reach a point where they really don't get better. And I have not noticed a lot of improvement in Aljamain Sterling. I mean, I think he's going to be popular. People are going to target him again. Being a New York guy, this is essentially a local fight for him. But I do kind of like what I see with Johns. And I think Johns is going to be very popular. A lot of, it goes without saying, I don't know if it's fan bias, but a lot of the European analysts are on Brett Johns for this fight. I think you should probably use both of these guys in GPPs. I am going to pick Brett Johns to win. I will have higher ownership of Brett Johns.
Fantastic. Chris?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on this fight. I have to eat a little crow because I wasn't really a fan of Brett Johns when he came in. I picked Kwan Ho Kwak in that fight, and to my ultimate dismay, just saw Kwak get taken down over and over and over again. Johns has essentially fought the same way in every fight. She tries to close the distance. His striking isn't dysfunctional. He's got a decent jab. He goes to the body sometimes, but his ultimate goal, of course, is to get to the ground. But I think Sterling is, I would disagree a little bit that he hasn't improved at all as a fighter. His striking maybe hasn't made the leaps that we have expected, but we saw a really slick back take of Renan Barão in that fight that really impressed me. So I think going to the Sierra Longo point, I think the grappling is right where it needs to be. I think the in and out movement, as always, can be challenging for takedowns. I understand it being hard to know what you're going to get out of Aljamain Sterling after seeing that vicious knee knockout, but he's the more athletic guy. I would say I don't know if he would be the better grappler, although I might put my money behind that. But this is a tough fight for me. I think that Johns is maybe your cash play because of all the takedowns, but I kind of like Sterling to maybe keep this on the feet and style a little bit, and maybe if it does get taken to the ground, maybe we see that Sierra Longo grappling in action.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if I gave my pick, but and I think you guys kind of danced around it, but for me, it just seems like the way that Brett Johns wins plays into Aljamain Sterling a little too much. So I'm not necessarily, the biggest Aljamain Sterling fan. I think he got overhyped pretty quickly. And I think Brett Johns is adequately hyped. I think maybe he's definitely on the upper end of being overhyped, or on the low end of being overhyped. But nevertheless, I get the hype there. But to me, this just stylistically, I think Brett Johns plays into Aljamain Sterling too much. So even though I think Brett Johns is the better fighter, if you're asking who's the better fighter, I'm going to go Brett Johns. If you're saying who's going to win this fight, I'm going to go Aljamain Sterling. I just really think that Sterling, he's going to play too much into it. He's going to play too much into it. He's going to rely on the takedowns. He's going to rely on the jits. And I think Aljamain Sterling can get away from the jits. And I think takedown defense is better. And I think his takedowns are also better. I think the defense and the actual way of getting the takedowns is better anyway. So yeah, I think this is just stylistically a good matchup for Aljamain Sterling. So it's just going to come down to me, it's can Johns grab a limb at some point? Right. I mean, really is what it's going to come down to.
I will say that, I expect Brett Johns to be pretty heavily owned here, and I expect
me too.
People to be off Aljo because of the last fight, and even most his fights have been slower paced in the past as well. So if you're correct, and I definitely do see paths for Sterling here, then I think that could be a really good leverage play in GPP.
I'm going for it. Don't you guys worry. All right, we have David Branch taking on Thiago Santos. To me, this is the easiest fight on the card, in my most humble opinion. I think Santos goes in there and probably walks through David Branch. So that is my prediction. That's all the analysis I'm going to get. Chris, we'll kick it back to you.
Sure. I'm not quite as confident.
Real quick. Sorry. The DraftKings prices on that one. Santos is at 8.9. David Branch is at 7.3. So it looks like the DraftKings universe agrees with me.
Well, I agree with you as well. Just maybe not so wholeheartedly. I do think that I like Thiago Santos a lot. I liked him. He got some shine taken off him, and I guess deservedly so after that brutal Eric Spice loss. Yeah. But I think he was hurt in that fight. At least that was the scuttlebutt. And I think that he's been really been coming into his own here. I think he moves well. He has a tendency to flurry wildly a little bit, but can also keep opponents at the end of his punches. He's got a really athletic blitzing style. He's got these spinning kicks that are somehow accurate. He's knocked out 2 with them now. But I just think Branch can pose specific problems because we've seen sort of that pressuring boxing that Branch likes to use give Santos a little bit of trouble before it was giving him a little bit of trouble in that Jack Marshman fight, which he ultimately won. But putting the pace on Thiago Santos and not letting him maybe get off all that flashy offense and not letting him go off in those bursts, I think could play to his advantage. And I think if he gets it to the ground here, I think that's his fight as well. So I like Santos better. Wouldn't go past Branch, especially at the price, and especially Branch. I think another fighter who a lot of people are gonna go be off of after Rockhold made him quit with strikes. So if you think this is his fight, that could be another nice value play.
I think Santos is going to make easy work of Mr. Branch. Sung Soo?
So there's a path to victory for Branch here. I mean, to Chris's point, I think Santos is one of those fighters. If you're putting together a lineup on DraftKings of guys who are going to get finishes, or potentially get finishes, I should say, you want Santos in that lineup, right? But there is a path. I think he's a fighter with a higher ceiling than floor, because if he doesn't get the finish, I don't know that he's going to be on a winning lineup. And I do see Branch, if he pressures him, if he gets him to the ground, we could potentially, we know he's susceptible to submission, Santos. So again, another New York fighter is Branch. So this is essentially a local fighter for him. He's 36 years old, so he is kind of getting towards that back end of his career. He's got some good accolades outside of the UFC. I think it's worth having some lineups with Branch in mass entry GPPs. I think he could be sneaky. There is a path to victory for him. I am not going to pick him to win. I'm going to pick Santos. There's other guys I like. I mentioned Alex Garcia, who's slightly more expensive. I think has got a more legitimate chance to actually win the fight. But I will be using lineups with Branch in mass entry JPPs. And just, to be clear here, with 11 fights, the ownership levels on all the fighters are going to go up. Last week we had 14 fights. This week we have 11 fights. So the ownership levels are going to go up. And I also think that Santos is going to pick up some of Bibu's ownership.
I like that his name is Bibu.
I call him Bibu. Bibu.
Yeah, I just think anything outside of divine intervention, I think Santos gets this, and I think he probably knocks him out.
Wow.
I think he knocks him out quicker than Rockhold does.
Okay.
So we'll see. We shall see. This is one of those kind of drawing. I'm drawing a hard line in the sand, and I'm going to live or die by it. Speaking of not drawing hard lines, we have Chase Sherman taking on Justin Willis. I do love Justin Willis, but I'm really sad that this fight. I wish this was on a pay-per-view, so that way you could have heard both of these guys talk. The problem is, so Willis actually is really good on the mic. He's hilarious. The problem is Chase Sherman. His Twitter was run by someone else. It was run by his manager. Oh, no. I've heard
Chase that.
Sherman. Yes, I've heard Chase Sherman on interviews. The guy's not all that funny. So I will say, what I really wanted was Justin Willis in person versus Chase Sherman's Twitter. Really, that's the matchup that I wanted to see. But yeah, the build up to this fight hasn't been what I think a lot of us were hoping that maybe it could be. But I don't know. As far as prediction for this fight, I've seen people who are all in on Justin Willis. That's interesting to me. DraftKings has it as 9-3 and 6-9. I believe Willis is the most expensive on the card.
He is now.
Because it was Bibulatov.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that seems beyond absurd to me. I mean, that is
no
to
way.
Me, that's crazy to me. But
I am. This is the fight I circled. Like
you're all in. You're all in on Willis.
Chase Sherman. Fading Chase Sherman is better than compound interest.
I know. It's true though, man. He's
yeah, I mean, let's talk about it.
If you use your face as a punching bag against someone who cuts down to 265, you're going to get knocked out.
So here's the thing. Every advantage goes to Justin Willis in this fight. I actually posted my bets, my 5 dimes bets. I've got a lot of exposure to Justin Willis inside the distance. I got a lot of exposure to fight doesn't go the distance. I don't know why. I mean, Chase could not put away Damon Grabowski. He got knocked out by a pillow-fisted wrestler in his last fight. He seems to be making some right moves, like going to Jackson. I don't think one camp at Jackson Wink is going to teach you how to move your head. Justin Willis is an extremely athletic, uber heavyweight, 265. He actually comes from a very good camp. He trains at AKA with Daniel Cormier, Cain Velasquez. He's got Chase. He could take Chase Sherman down. He's got the hand speed advantage. My only fear is that Jackson Wink gets into Chase Sherman's ear and says, run. So if Chase Sherman runs away for 3 rounds, okay, I'll be a little upset. But to me, this is the fight to circle. I had created 147 lineups, and I got to correct a lot of them, of course, because I created them before the fights got canceled. Of those 147 lineups, I had 1 with Chase Sherman in it. So I am gonna eat the biggest pork chop I've ever eaten if Chase Sherman somehow wins, or if Willis is not impressive. I'll happily eat that pork chop. I think that this is bye-bye Chase, pink slip time. Let's go fight in World Series of Fighting or Bellator, and stay at Jackson Wink. Maybe you'll get better. They'll teach you how to move your head. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no reason to not be on Justin Willis. I think he might have the best inside the distance prop right now. He's going to now, unfortunately, get a ton of ownership from BB. So he's not the secret that I hoped he would be, but fading Chase, again, it's better than compound interest.
Chris?
Well, let's get straight. I agree that Willis should win this fight, but there's a couple of things I think that first of all, it's heavyweight MMA, and we saw how well that worked out last week with Adam Wazurek and his omoplata, his amazing omoplata.
Yeah, but I actually told you on be underexposed to Bular.
I know, and I didn't listen. That's that's the kind of guy I am. But I think, I mean, I like Willis a lot too. I think he's a good slick boxer. He keeps himself safe. He throws in combination. He's a good wrestler, as you said, the AKA connection, Joe. But we saw him look not so great and sort of gas out in his debut against Mulroney. And you could say that was his debut, octagon jitters, etc. But we do know that generally, even though he is coming off the knockout by in his last fight by the pillow fist, as you put it. But we do know that usually Chase Sherman's pretty hard to put away. And if Willis can gas out because he is a big boy, then maybe Sherman can start to take over here if this gets into the later rounds. We saw what he did to Rashad Coulter with those leg kicks, and while he's in there, he's actually pretty athletic for a heavyweight. So
Rashad Coulter was a short notice replacement. You know that, right?
I know that.
Who totally gassed out and still lit up Chase Sherman. Chase Sherman has fought nobody.
Here we go.
That's what frustrates me when I hear how athletic he is, and he's got these great leg kicks. He could not put away Damon Grabowski, the worst heavyweight fighter on the UFC roster, who retired and is now growing potatoes in Siberia. I mean, Abramov, he is not known for having knockout power, and he finished him in 13 seconds. So Chase Sherman is easy to put away. He hasn't fought anybody. He's fought some of the worst fighters in the UFC. Coulter was just beat to hell by somebody. Okay, Chase Sherman, I don't know how he keeps getting fights. I mean, probably off of his Grabowski win. I mean, he was part of the camp in Mississippi with Alan Belcher. And Belcher, as we know, that is a camp that preaches like going forward. That's Jason Knight. That's Davis. They're all part of that Aaron Belcher camp. Hopefully Jackson Wink is teaching him some things, but I'd be shocked getting its heavyweight, getting, he could run away for 3 rounds and Willis can gas. I get it. I get all of that. I just don't see a path to victory for Chase Sherman. I very rarely say that. I don't see a path to victory for Chase Sherman here.
All right, well, let's move along. We have 2 fights left. Our co-main is Frankie Edgar taking on Cub Swanson. A couple things to note here. This is, in fact, a rematch. Frankie Edgar besting Cub Swanson in the first fight. I'm not going to talk about the first fight too much because I feel like we as analysts get a little hung up on that stuff. Also, Frankie Edgar, worth noting, coming off of the first knockout loss of his career, not all that long ago. So he's making a very, Aljamain Sterling, I think, is coming back pretty quick. Edgar's coming back even quicker. So that's a little bit concerning, but he wasn't knocked out cold by Ortega or anything like that. But nevertheless, it's a interesting choice for him to take this fight and take it so quickly. If I'm playing GPPs and doing as many lineups as you guys do, I think I'm definitely exposing myself to Cub Swanson. Well, that was a weird way to put that.
Oh.
I do not want to expose myself to Cub Swanson, but I do want to expose my lineups to his price point. Cub Swanson coming in.
Isolate that would be great.
That was a good one. I'm gonna have to go back and screen grab that one.
Yeah, see, this is what doing live as opposed to your recorded podcast.
Yeah, I see. Right, what I would do is I would bleep that. I just bleep, just all of a sudden beep, and everyone's like, "What did he say right there?" Frankie Edgar coming in at 9,000, Cub Swanson coming in at 7,200. I know we're pressed for time, so Sung Soo, let me kick it over to you.
So more than any other fighter, Frankie Edgar is associated with New Jersey. I mean, there's a large billboard. I remember, as I was kind of getting into MMA on a more permanent basis with Frankie Edgar on it, New Jersey's own. So I have to believe that Frankie Edgar, I don't like the 7-week turn time. The fact that his father passed away. I mean, there's a lot of personal angles and issues going on with this fight. I honestly wish he wouldn't have taken this fight. If everybody is in the right mind, I think Frankie Edgar finishes Cub Swanson quite easily. But coming off the 7-week knockout, having those personal issues, which could either motivate you or depress you, I think the only reason he's taking this fight is because he can't see a New Jersey card without his name being on it. I'm still going to pull for him to win in this fight. I mean, I'm shocked that the UFC actually gave Cub Swanson such a good deal and by re-signing him, because again, he takes a lot of abuse. He's not looked great in his last fight. Everybody is thinking back to that fight of the year with the Korean Superboy. But I still am going to take Edgar in this fight. I will have some exposure to Cub and NGPPs. I think Edgar may take some of Bibu's ownership. I don't think he'll take the most of it. I think Willis will, but I'm going to pick Frankie Edgar, but I could see having exposure to both sides.
Chris?
I'm going to go ahead and take Edgar as well. I think, the fact that he just got, star punched into oblivion by Brian Ortega is something to keep in mind, but I really don't know how much we want to put into that because there's nothing that we know for sure based on that. So it can be in the back of your mind. It can sort of limit your exposure a little bit, but I don't think, at least for me, it's going to affect that greatly how much I see the fight. And I just think Frankie's going to do what he always does. He's going to do what won him the first fight. He's going to keep a ridiculous pace, combination box. It's worth noting that everyone who tries to take Cub Swanson down pretty much does, including Frankie. His last couple opponents haven't really tried, but there was Kawajiri before that who took him down 3 times. So I sort of see this fight going kind of the same as the first one, with the caveat that Edgar just got knocked out. We know that Cub Swanson has power, and rubber can meet road here if that's the case.
All right. Well, last but not least, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, so we'll finish off with it. We have Kevin Lee taking on Edson Barboza. Personal opinion, I have thought for a very long time that Edson Barboza was basically, I thought he was the top guy in the division. I didn't pick him to beat Khabib, but that was basically it. I think if he rematches Tony Ferguson, I'm going Barboza. And honestly, I'm going Barboza here. And I think that Kevin Lee's next fight is more than likely going to be at 170. And I think he's going to be that much more affected by this weight cut. Although that is not why I'm picking Barboza. I'm picking Barboza simply because I just think he has every tool that you need to beat a guy like Kevin Lee, to be able to stay at range, to be able to land something. And I do think he's going to beat Kevin Lee. I think there's a very real possibility that he does so in spectacular fashion. Kevin Lee will do everything in his power to try to get his hands around Barboza's waist, and he is not Khabib. He is not Khabib. He's not going to be able to get in there in the same way, and I think one of those shoots, I think he's going to get caught with something. So my pick is Edson Barboza. The weight cut issues hasn't really affected me too much. The prices for this fight, I had it, and then now it's gone. I believe it was 8-4 for Edson Barboza.
No,
I got it. I got it, Joe. It's 8,400 for Kevin Lee, and your Barboza price is 7,800.
Thank you. 8-4 Kevin Lee, and then 7-8 Barboza. So I'm gonna take the underdog in Barboza here. Chris, we'll finish off with you, buddy.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you. I like Barboza here, and not because of the weight cut as we were discussing earlier, but because I think Kevin Lee, he'll take the center of the octagon, but he doesn't really pressure all that much. He doesn't really push you back into the fence while striking, and that is something you really need to do to beat Barboza, because you need, as we've seen with all great leg kickers, to beat them, or kickers in general, to beat them, you need to not let them get their feet set to throw those kicks. And I think that Kevin Lee's going to give him too much time and space, more time than he should. I like Kevin Lee. I think he's a good, solid boxer, but I don't think his striking can hang with the likes of Barboza. I also think that Barboza's takedown defense is still really strong. Forget that he stopped a lot of Khabib's takedowns early before Khabib finally got to him. And Kevin Lee really isn't, that blitzkrieg takedown guy. He won't try again and again and again. He'll try once, and if you stop it, okay, we'll go back to striking for a while. And I think that's going to be now he could surprise us because Khabib sort of changed his game plan in constantly moving forward and smothering the kick. So Kevin Lee could draw up a nice little game plan here and surprise us. But just by going by what we've seen, I'm going to go with Barboza here.
Wow. See, so I was in the Kevin Lee camp all week, right? This weight cut issue has me rethinking my position simply because I don't know what effect it's going to have on Kevin Lee's psyche, knowing one, that he's giving up 20% of his purse, and two, that he can't win a bonus. There's a few other angles on this fight. Obviously, his coach, Robert Follis, died. He's now in a gym where he is pretty much the center of attention. That's either good or bad. Some fighters, like Valentina Shevchenko, she has that kind of camp where it's all about her. Others like to be in gyms with a lot of fighters. His new camp is, where it's all about him. Edson Barboza this is actually, believe it or not, a local fight for him. He's now training he trains a lot in New Jersey with Mark Henry. So this is kind of a local fight for him. God, I really was on Kevin Lee prior to what happened today. I don't know if I'm going to change my pick. I am going to increase my Barboza exposure in GPPs. In terms of, this is a main event, so the stacking issue always comes up. I don't know if this is a clear-cut stack like last week's main event and the co-main event of the week prior. I don't know if it's as sure of a stack. Especially if you like Barboza, it's a great place to draw a line in the sand and pay 7.8K for Barboza in this fight. Again, I'm still going to have some exposure to Lee. I've not yet decided to totally back off my pick, but I am concerned about Lee, and I think Barboza is going to get a lot more love for all those reasons that I mentioned.
Well, guys, we did it. We made it. We got through the entire card. I'll say you guys can find me at Loudmouth MMA. I really appreciate RotoWire here for letting me come on, letting me host. I didn't, hopefully I did it justice. I'm not as much of I'm not nearly as much of a DraftKings guy as your actual host, Sean has, the DFS sniper. So he probably has a little bit more DraftKings centric hosting than I did. So I apologize for that.
But you added value,
going on the fly
with the Tony Martin story.
There we go. That's it. That's what you
guys. I didn't see that. I may be more inclined now to add some Martin. More Martin to my GPP, so we appreciate that. And I am, of course, at Sun Tzu on Twitter. Follow me. I'm always happy to. I don't plead for followers, but I'm always happy to talk fights. I'm generally up late. I'm a night owl. Want to just get this. I want to talk about RotoWire real quick. I've actually been using a lot of the RotoWire services. Just the MMA content for RotoWire is not behind any pay window. So, you'll have access to all the MMA content for free by going to rotowire.com. They do offer a 10-day trial with no credit card needed. I've actually won money with the golf content, believe it or not, and the NBA content. I have not done much yet in MLB, but I found the the golf content to be top-notch, helped me win a triangle ticket and some cash. And I definitely have won some money based on the DFS NBA content. And RotoWire is a stat provider to DraftKings as well. So I would definitely say if you have any interest in checking out all the content, sign up for that free trial, no credit card required. Again, you can find me at Sun Tzu. Chris, you want to sign off?
Well, Joe, I was going to say, when you do decide to hit some MLB DFS, be sure to check out my articles every Tuesday and Thursday on RotoWire.
Segue.
That's right. I'm getting better at this stuff, at it. So I will say that I am at Real Chris Olson on Twitter. give me a like and a follow. I have no problem pleading for followers, unlike Joe. And I will say goodbye with that, and I will say good luck on your DraftKings plays this weekend.
Howdy.